Hello, my name's Bob Goodykunst, and welcome to How to Church, I Wish I Knew, a series of videos sponsored by the Penn Northeast Conference of the United Church of Christ and put together by various ministry teams within our conference with the aim of serving churches, pastors, and congregations within our conference and the wider church in dealing with various aspects of congregational life together. This is the third in our series of videos, and our topic for this video is going to be community engagement. How do we better engage our community? How do we meet and serve our neighbors? In some cases, perhaps, how do we discern who those neighbors might be? I think that serving in our community is probably one of the things that most churches would consider to be an important part of our calling. Once again, serving as the moderator of our discussion is going to be the Reverend Dr. Matt Gorkas, the pastor of Good Shepherd United Church of Christ in Albertus, PA. And serving on our discussion panel today are going to be Reverend Janet Newitt from UCC Greenewalds, Jacob Roth, a member of Union United Church of Christ in Neffs, PA, and also a musician for various churches within our conference, and the Reverend Rebecca Saucer, the pastor of St. John's United Church of Christ in Allentown. And joining us by video is going to be the Reverend Dr. Will Hagenview from First Congregational Church in Horford, PA. All right, without further ado, let us discover how to church. Like the
no.
Well, thank you all for joining us this day to be part of this panel. I'm really excited to have the group of you here and to talk about community engagement. It's an honor for me to be able to sort of facilitate this conversation because I respect all of you and the work that you are doing through your churches and just as individuals in your community. It's a privilege to be part of this. The three of you who are gathered here, and then also our one panelist who isn't necessarily here with us, but is a part of this conversation too, Will, who was able to see some of the questions, some of what we'd be talking about, and pre-record some videos for us. And so we thank him for his part of this as well. And I want to start our conversation, especially since we're talking about community engagement, by letting Will give us an insight into what is it that we mean when we're talking about community. What is community?
Pastors are always pastors. We're always people. We're always out. We're always about. We're never completely polished. We're never perfect. We're just present, or seemingly present, or maybe even absent in some scenes, but we're people. So how do we engage in community? We simply be a part and live in community. As a United Church of Christ person, community is so amazingly and liberally and tremendously unspecific. Who is community? Where does it stop? Is community a half a mile from the congregation? Is community 5 miles from the congregation? Is community the world? The answers to these questions are all yes. Is community meeting someone who's never been to the church before so that that parking lot moment can be made so beautiful because there's a connection? Meeting people as they enter worship is community. Recognizing that wherever we go and whatever we say, beautifully and imperfectly and tremendously and terribly, we're still community. There are no lines. There are no borders. There are no boundaries. Community doesn't stop and shouldn't stop.
So I think it's great the way that Will talks about community as this beautifully unspecific kind of a thing. It really helps with defining what community is. But I think what's so true about that is that often community is defined by the way we engage it. And so I want to give each of you a chance to just kind of talk about and briefly describe what it is that you or your church does to engage its community. So, Becky.
Sure. So I'm Reverend Becky Saucer. I serve at St. John's United Church of Christ in Allentown on 36 South 6th Street. And I think that when I first arrived about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, that the church itself was rediscovering what that community looked like, because so much has changed over the last even just 10 years in that location and in that specific spot. And so for us, getting out into the community and finding out who are our neighbors. So the first entire month that I was there, I just spent almost every day out of the office introducing myself to the local politicians, to the local nonprofits in the area, what groups are there, meeting and interviewing at Central Elementary, all these amazing groups in the area that we were able to work with and find out who are our community partners, and then getting to know the people. Just walking around, working with the nonprofits that now are able to bless us in our ministry together collaboratively. We've taken our building and we've turned it into a community nonprofit hub. And so to be able to work one-on-one with people and to connect them with what their needs are, I think has just been a really unique and special thing at St. John's. Specifically, we have a Battle-Born Veterans Resource Center, which was able to fill in a lot of the gaps of the needs in that community. We host a number of recovery programs in our building, and just lots of other wonderful things going on, but I could go on and on.
No, that's awesome, and thank you and your church so much for the ministry that you have. Jacob?
Sure. So I come at community engagement from a little bit different of a perspective from the other panel participants, and that is through the lens of local government. So I first got involved in local government in my home municipality of South Whitehall Township almost 6 years ago. At the time, there were some development projects going on, some other concerns in the community, and myself and a group of my neighbors decided that we would just go to a meeting and observe and ask questions and express our public safety concerns, our traffic concerns, etc. None of us had any tangible experience with local government before, so it was our introduction to that process and to that specific community entity. After that, I kept attending meetings. I kept educating myself on all the areas in which local government sort of affects our lives, from land use planning to public safety to other municipal services. And over time, a lot of improvements were made in the community and in the local government that were really necessary. We got some new folks elected to the governing body, the Board of Commissioners in the township. And then in November of 2022, one of those individuals resigned from the board to move out of state. And I decided that was the right time for me to step up and apply for the position. I was appointed unanimously, and I served an entire year. And this past November, I was elected to a full 4-year term. So as a member of that entity and talking about community engagement and local government's involved in almost every aspect of one's daily life. From every time you turn on a faucet, you have water that's coming from a municipal water system, sewer, trash, paving the roads, parks, police, fire, and EMS, and all these other sort of parts of our lives that we might not think about a lot, but for those of us involved in local government, it's what we try to bring to our residents and set policy direction on things like land use and quality of life and a multitude of other issues. Outside of local government, I am a member of a union, UCC, and NEFS. And if I were to talk about everything that union does in the community, we'd be here all day. But I'm so proud to be a part of that congregation that has taken the topic of community engagement really seriously and has done a lot of great work, both in that small community and in the community at large. In addition to my own church, I'm also a musician. I'm a church organist. I've had the great opportunity to sub for at a number of churches, both in the Lehigh Valley and beyond. So getting to be a part of not only my own faith community, but the broader faith community, and to observe how different churches do things and ways that they engage in the community has been really beneficial for me. And I've learned a lot about community engagement and ways that the church can successfully engage with others.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jacob. And Janet.
Hi, well, I am. This is United Church of Christ Greenwald. It's where we are, and I am the pastor here. And I became the pastor here in June of 22, and this church was engaged with Family Promise of the Lehigh Valley at that time, and they actually were the first congregation to work with Family Promise when they came into the valley. Now it was 6 years ago. Back then it was 5 years ago, and Family Promise works with host congregations to take homeless families or transitional families, families facing homelessness, to give them a place to stay for a week at a time at different congregations. But what we were trying to do is to double the amount of families that they serve, and we were actively working with them. We have a unique situation where we have we call it the annex, it's our parsonage, and we thought, well, we have this house, let's help more people in our community by getting them off the street. It can hold 4 different families, and we engaged in this whole process of bringing in an architect, and our congregation voted on this partnership, and it was a very exciting project for our congregation to be involved with Family Promise, and in a long-term way, being able to affect our community in such a positive way. Unfortunately, South Whitehall Township,
Local government,
blocked our project recently, and we will still continue to, mission is at the heart of who we are. And so, people always say, like, when one door opens, when something closes, another door opens, right? And bizarrely enough, right as all of this is happening, a small church, a non-denominational church, and this is the first time anyone's really hearing this outside the congregation, came to us and said, we are looking for a place to worship. And what we have, Greenewald's mission is about being able to be present in the community and making disciples, right? And so here's this church that doesn't have a building. And so we are in the process of being able to partner with them. And we're looking forward to seeing where that goes from here.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I think what stands out to me, and I think that's a good segue into the next sort of part of our conversation, what jumps out is each of you just shared very different ways that you're all involved in community engagement. So it looks different to each of us. And yet I think the thing that each of us here, and probably anybody who's watching this, agrees on is that community engagement is important. And it's important because there's something about our faith and what we believe that tells us it's important. And so I'm interested how you would sort of say, this is what it is about my faith and what I believe that drives me to do the community engagement that I do. And I want to, again, sort of turn to Will, because I think Will sort of sets us up with some of that connection, and then I'll hear from you all as to sort of how you see that connection working in your own work.
Community engagement is something that seems so complicated or arduous or just plain difficult, but it's not. Community engagement is the joy of living with a God who constantly and consistently guides. Some people call it a nudge. Some people call it a God wink. But God does God's thing when God calls us into places of connection. It's never something burdensome. It's never something impossible. It's never something difficult. We can have reservations. We can be scared. We can be doubtful. But community engagement is simply opening our hearts and our arms to those around us. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be well laid out. It doesn't have to be well thought out. It's simply, truly, completely being open in the moment to the Holy Spirit guiding.
So, you all, how do you see that sort of theology and faith informing what it is that you're doing? And whoever wants to chime in here, feel free to go ahead.
So one of the things that made my partnership with St. John's just so kismet, and then we fit so well together, is because our ministry view and the way that we view our role as representing Christ's hands and feet in the community, serving as Christ's body, moving and working in this community, just really dovetails so beautifully. So one of the things to know about St. John's, and I know I'm going to be like a proud parent and just talk about my church like that, but they, date back to 1867. But in the 60s, they had this huge discerning process with, do we renovate the building, or do we go buy property outside of the, where we've served for this long? And they recommitted themselves to this amazing mission statement. Everything that we have says ministry in the heart of the city, because they didn't want to leave the ministry opportunities that were there to serve the community. And so I think our faith together speaks to carrying the light of Christ out into the community. Every single Sunday we say, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, that you're welcome here, and we mean it, and we're going to live that out.
So the hands and the feet and the heart
and
of
the heart.
Jesus. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
And I think, what's important about that phrase, engaging communities, it's not just like giving money. And don't get me wrong, giving is important, clearly. But, with Greenwald's, yes, we have the regular, benevolent giving to the soup kitchen and, community bike works and Lehigh County Conference of Churches that probably most of us give. But if we are to serve and be the hands and feet of Jesus, and Jesus met people where they were, right? And one of the things about Family Promise, for instance, is that our congregation loves is being able to get in there and bring meals to the folks and talk to them and play with the kids when they're here, and find out what they need and listen to their stories. And, it all comes down to building relationships. And, that's what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to build a relationship with God. We're supposed to build a relationship with one another. And that's what being engaged with our community is about, finding what the needs are and trying to meet those needs together,
Yeah, and I'll sort of build off of that. One of the best things about community engagement is you actually get to go out and meet individuals. If you take the sort of smaller definition of community, your own neighbors that you might not talk to otherwise unless you're there with a purpose, you're there to help, you're there to engage, you're there to learn. So it gives you an opportunity to sort of expand your own community and learn about a community that you're already a part of, a place where you live, a place where you shop, a place where you take your walk in your own neighborhood. And one of the reasons why I think community engagement is so intertwined with with our faith and our faith communities is that for many of us who are lifelong congregants, no matter what church we're at, the church is sort of the first community we know outside of our own families. When you're an infant and all you really know is your family and those who your family engages you with as a baby, but then you're baptized into the church, and maybe you attend church as a little kid even before preschool, going to Sunday school and getting involved in church activities. So the church in itself and community engagement within the church is an important thing, because like I said, for many of us, the church is really the first community we know that includes individuals who are not family, who are maybe not like us, come from a different economic background, a different work background. So our faith sort of manifests itself in two communities: the church community initially, and then as we seek to put our principles into practice, the larger community. And how large that community is, this was discussed before, all depends on where you want to focus your attention and energy.
Yeah, I love that. I love that as the church modeling what community ought to be, and sort of that piece of it. I think that's such a great vision then for sort of how we then go out into the larger communities and think about building those relationships and impacting people's lives. What I think a lot of folks who may be watching this video, I think at this point, they're probably saying, yeah, I'm with you. We feel the same way, exactly. But I think some of the question that they might have is, okay, our church, we're on the same page. We think community engagement is important. We want to impact the lives of the people around us. What in the world do we actually do? Because I think if they're listening to us so far, they're saying, okay, they've named a whole bunch of different ways that their churches, or they in particular, are involved in getting and engaging their community. How do we know which one is the one that we're supposed to be doing as a church? How do we discern what is right for us? And I think that's this point that a lot of churches, a lot of people in our churches get to, and just get so overwhelmed by all of the options that are out there of things that we can do to be engaged, that they never get past the choosing process. And so I'm interested to hear, and we're going to hear from Will again first, but I'm interested to hear just how you all sort of figured out what it was that was right, in the right way for you all to engage the community, or for your churches to engage the community. So let's hear from Will, and then I want to hear from you too.
When I think of the times that our church has been most effective, and we've been out there with mission projects, global care initiatives, neighborhood connections, what matters most is that we bring ourselves. We bring ourselves. I don't think it has to be that challenging. I don't think it has to be that difficult. I think with faith and courage aligned, and sometimes those can seem difficult to put together, but when faith and courage are aligned, when we are present enough to hear God enough to follow where and how God is calling us into a situation, then there's community, there's church, there's love, there's growth, there's peace, there's love. My single piece of advice is not to wait, but to listen to a God who continues to do the most amazing things, which is make God's self be known.
Well, I think for Greenewald's, the question, how do we decide what, where we go or what we give our energy to? The question would be, or the answer is, when we look around, what is our passion? What are we good at? There's no point in trying to be someone that we're not. So we want to do what we're already good at, I think is important. and then look at what the needs are and try to meet those needs. So for instance, besides Family Promise and that project, even though it ended up very, very, very recently coming to a close, we were able to say, well, we don't know what God wanted us to learn from this project, but we're just gonna we'll move on to the next project, and at the same time we have other things going on. So we just took our mission group just looked at oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget the name of it. I can't think of the name of it. Wow, my mind went blank. Well, a group that gets 10% of all of our fundraising budget. So we have that coming up, but also our mental health ministry team looked at our congregation as a whole and what they care about, and we just voted on this past Sunday on a WISE covenant, and we're going to be taking the actions needed to get that designation. And that to me is also community engagement. How can we let the community know that we care about not just their individual mental health and addiction, substance abuse issues, but those they care about? How can we be a safe space for them? There's so many ways to be a safe haven. And, it's not just about mission per se. And I think sometimes we forget about that when it comes to community engagement. So, what do you care about? What does your church care about? I think it's the question that you ask. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that's part of it. What you said sort of reminds me of one of the things that I remember hearing, even when thinking about your personal call, right?
Yeah.
Is this idea of where your passions meet the world's needs. That's your call. That's where God wants you. And it sounds like that's kind of the way that your church has sort of figured out. What are we passionate about? Seems like that's where we're needed. Let's do that.
Yeah. I would say with St. John's, one of the things that, because there is so much need, it's so easy to get that caregiver's fatigue of, where are our strengths? What are the needs of the community? And so one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give when speaking with congregations about discerning what is that going to look like for us is to do some asset mapping, which is something that there's tons of resources out there to help do it. But realizing that asset mapping isn't just we are a church, we have a building, we have 60 chairs in the basement that no one's ever touched, right? But looking at what are the assets in our community, what are the things that are already being done, and where are the gaps? How can we help fill in those gaps? And most importantly, I think that our greatest strength, not only as St. John's, but also as the United Church of Christ, is the fact that we are able to work collaboratively with our community, and we're able to work with, maybe we don't have what you need, but we just happen to be the door you walked into. How can we help meet your needs, create that safe space that Janet was talking about, make you feel comfortable, and then help you in the right direction of getting your needs met?
Yeah. I actually suspect that there's some overlap in what you just said and Jacob thinking about this from a local government perspective, because when you talk about having to sort of assess and triage, there's lots of options. What can we afford to do? What do we have the energy to do? I suspect that that's a lot of what goes on in local government, where they're saying we're in charge of all of this and everything needs help. How do we know what needs to be prioritized and where to budget fits in all of that part? So where does this resonate sort of with you?
Yeah, there's a lot of different angles I could come at this from, and I'll try to be as concise as possible. But in some of the, we talk about churches struggling to figure out what's their place, where to dedicate their energy to. I found myself in that similar situation just as a person. All throughout my high school years and my college years, I've always had an interest in civic engagement, in building relationships, in public policy, and I had a lot of really great opportunities to engage in those types of conversations, at the national level, at the state level, different internships and jobs that I had. But what I kept coming back to is that experience I had at my first local government meeting almost 6 years ago, which was, all right, where can I have the greatest impact almost immediately, right? You can put a lot of energy into trying to solve a problem or get involved in a particular issue that is maybe global or even national, but really, if you have a limited amount of energy, where can you expend that energy now to have an immediate impact? And for me, that was local government. Within local government, it oftentimes depends on what is the demand? What is the demand? What are people asking for? Is it about land use? Is it about keeping costs down? Is it ways of sort of recommitting ourselves to public safety? What are people really asking for? What do they need? What needs are faced by? We're a municipality of 21,000 people, which is actually quite small comparatively, but we have a lot of different villages and we have a lot of different neighborhoods, and they're all different, but there are areas in which they overlap. But that sort of logic, as I think of it as a congregant, is, how do we apply that to the church? And I even remember, from an early age, flipping through the bulletin and just seeing all the different ways in which my church was engaged in all sorts of communities. There were offerings for this charity, and there's this cause, which is national. There's this cause international. In another part of the world, there's this organization that we're going to sponsor, this local organization that we're looking for volunteers to get engaged in. And I thought that was wonderful. And I thought it was really great that, my church and our denomination as the United Church of Christ had sort of made that multi-pronged commitment, but it does wear down on energy, and people don't necessarily have the time to spread themselves that thin. So I would give advice to any church that's kind of thinking, where might I fit in? Where do I want to put my energy? Is kind of what I did. Look to your neighborhood. Look to your local area. What is really the need? We're blessed here in this part of Pennsylvania, especially in the Lehigh Valley. We're a microcosm of the country in every positive sense of the word. But that also means that all the challenges that people face all over, people in this community face them too, whether it be homelessness, whether it be food deserts in both rural and urban communities, whether it be access to education, mental health, physical health, every sort of support network that people need based on their challenges and where they're located, we have that here. So I think it's a really great opportunity for churches individually and churches as groups and denominations to get involved. And I look at the benefit of that as being twofold. One, it allows the church to actually make an immediate positive contribution to their community by helping to solve a particular issue, be it homelessness, hunger, etc. But I also think there's a secondary benefit, to the church. Like St. John's in Allentown, you talk about it being a hub of community engagement and a hub of good. I think if churches were to market themselves more like that, as not just a place for people to come on Sunday and worship about our shared religious beliefs, but a place to get involved and a place to help others, I think that most people, whether they have a close association with the church or not, want to do good and they want to help others, but they don't always know where to go. What charitable organization do I donate to? Where do I get involved? I don't have the time. This organization, has more limited time constraints. But if we turn our churches into sort of hubs of good work, and that way, when you talk to people, not only if you're in trouble, where do you turn? To the church. But if you want to give back, where do you turn? No matter where you are on your faith journey, well, I go to the church and I get involved, and you'll have a church that's humming all week long. And not just on a Sunday morning.
Can I speak to that for a second?
Yeah.
That was our goal of, Cameron Trimble calls it this two-church model, that we have our Sunday church, and those people have maybe, we have consistory on a Tuesday night or something, but that building is a huge asset, and the whole rest of the week, we want that to be one of our greatest assets to help the community. And so to create it into this Sunday church, but also this whole rest of the 6.5 days of the rest of the week church where people can come and they can have their needs met. It used to be that the church would fill in the small groups and the little things that we had going on throughout the week. Now it's the church is this hospital, metaphorically speaking, not literally, but this hospital where you can come with your authentic self and say what you need and have those needs met, and then it fills into that other. We've turned the sieve upside down almost.
Well, and I think too, you look at, we're a lot of the energy of the church, both at the local level and the national level, has been over the past 10 to 15 years. What do we do to help increase attendance?
Yeah.
How do we connect with other groups? And I think a lot of the energy, and rightfully so, has been focused on worship. What do we have to introduce? What do we have to change? And I think that's a great approach, but I think it's an incomplete approach, because it's not all about worship. And one of the ways you're going to connect with new groups of people, with groups of young people, is give them a place where they feel like they have a purpose. So many people who are my age, or who don't attend church regularly, they have a passion, they have a cause. It might be education. So how do you tailor the church that? Well, maybe you have some sort of youth mentorship program where you're pairing people who come into the church who want to help with those in the community that need a little bit of tutoring, or even older professionals who are well off and have been successful in their careers. How do we set them up where they're sort of giving advice to other people? I mean, it's a great opportunity to sort of expand the church and reassert the church's dominance in the community. And as that's sort of been shrinking in terms of attendance, I think we have an opportunity to make the church just an incredible institution for so many people.
It's really a new model of church. It's not that worship isn't important.
Correct.
It's that for some people, worship is not what brings you in the door. Hopefully, worship will be what keeps you here. Right. I mean, I remember when we were doing some of the family promise stuff, we had someone say, well, why do we need to get out? Why do we need to get out in the community in the first place? And I was like, what? What do you like? What? Because that's the whole point, is letting people know that we're here, that God makes a difference in your life, and that if we don't let them know that we're here, and not to shove God in their face, but to meet them where they are, and to provide that, that tutoring program is a fabulous idea. And then it's in conversation, you end up kind of being the Bible that no one ever saw before.
And
they see it in you, right?
You're bringing in people, not just who are in need of help, but I think that's oftentimes the church's approach has been, we're going to make connections with the people who really need the help or need the services. This is an opportunity to actually make a connection with people who don't need the help, but who want to help.
Right,
and that's just, I think, an important goal.
I mean, those are the people who can support your church in its ministries, I
like to say that after Jesus gave that Sermon on the Mount, it's this rallying cry, and the disciples didn't stay up on that mount. They went out and they did the work.
Right.
And that's what it's at.
So before we get to sort of one more kind of question, I'm thinking about this, and as I'm listening to you all talk, the thing that I suddenly went off in my brain is one of the questions that we hear when we talk to people, and churches are asking, how do we get more people in church? Why aren't people coming to church? Where is everybody? Is that one of the responses, one of the questions that the world out there has is, well, what difference does it make? What difference does the church make? What difference does going to church make in my life or in the world? And as you all were speaking, it's the community engagement is the difference that we can see.
Yeah.
Of what the church, that is the answer to that question of what difference does a church make? It makes a difference as it engages its community. And I think that, so I think that's why this conversation is so important, is I think it answers that question that people have of why church, not just how church, but why church is the community engagement piece of it. So I want to ask all of you, if you can boil down this conversation to sort of one piece of advice that you have for somebody watching this video who's going to go back to their church, or who's going to sort of think to themselves of community engagement, what next? What do we do? What one piece of advice would you give them in sort of figuring out what's next for them in their church?
I'm going to just steal what Janet said earlier, and I'm going to say figuring out where your passion lies as a congregation. If your congregation is passionate about education or about unhoused persons, then that's where you should be pursuing and figuring out what are the needs in this community. And I would say not only figuring out your passion, but while doing that, watching out to stay away from the simple story. The simple story says, X, Y, Z. But our world is so much more gray and it's so much more complicated. And I think about a story from 2016 where there was an increase in hospitalizations for falls in across the entire valley with these older folks communities, and figuring out what's the actual cause of that, what's really going on, and not just saying, they're older, instability or whatever, but figuring out what can the community actually do to support and engage with people who are having an issue. So I'd say passion and figuring out what the actual story is, the whole story.
I had something, and then I got really wrapped up in what you were saying.
Sorry.
And then Becky stole your other one.
Yeah, really. No, actually, I think don't spread yourself too thin. I think you may have said that kind of earlier. It's like, just start small. Just pick something.
That's what I'm fond of telling people, and actually it's coming up this week, but when Paul talks about being everything, all things to all people or whatever, for being able to do this, I say, that sounds great for Paul. That sounds like a terrible idea for most of our churches.
Yeah.
Because then you're spread too thin. You can't be everything to everyone. Be what you can be to somebody.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
I would say that the most important thing is, as you plan to look to the future and how you might want to be engaged, think about what makes your church really unique. Is it the tie to the community? Is it your church's history? Is it the values, that you take the church's larger values and boil them down to what really matters for your church and your community? Understand your own congregation's story and who's in your church and what are they passionate about. And, we're part of obviously a larger church. And then within that, we're all part of, this similar denominations, but every church is still unique. And churches were always formed from the bottom up. And I think community engagement and, getting to the point where each church is involved in their community and where that overlaps and how they get involved with other churches. Again, it's from the bottom up. And that I think will be key to churches successfully engaging in their own communities and in other communities as well.
One other thing is that people don't always know how to talk to one another. And that sounds kind of silly, but practice talking to one another to share your own story, so that when you do get the opportunity, you don't miss it. You know how to talk to someone new.
Yeah. And lastly, I'm going to let Will chime in here on, he's got, I think, a way to close us out in terms of some advice for folks who are watching.
We overthink. We hem and haw, and we sit in committees and meetings and discern and discern and discern, when truly and simply what works best is that Nike slogan from years ago. Just do it. Just do it. Yes, we should give thought to what we're doing. Yes, we should plan what we're doing. Yes, we should organize and orchestrate what we're doing, but only to an extent. Just do it. We look at budget, we look at resources, we look at all sorts of stuff that just gets in the way because it's just stuff. How do we start? Just do it.
I love that closing sort of tone of just do it. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what the world needs, is for churches to simply engage, for Christians to simply engage, to do something. And so I think it's important, like we have talked about, to take the time to figure out where your passions are. Take the time to understand yourselves. Take the time to listen to your community and understand what are the needs, what are folks asking for. But at the end of the day, it's to do, to use your hands, to use your feet, to lend your heart to caring for your community. And so I just, again, want to thank all of you and thank Will for his participation, and thank you and your churches for the work in the ministry and for the doing that you all are involved in your communities. It means a lot, and hopefully, hopefully all of you who are watching this were inspired and maybe given a good idea, given some thought, given what your next step is towards what your church or what you could be doing to engage your community. So thank you for watching, and thanks to all of you for being a part of it.
You're welcome. That's awesome.